So yeah, my name is Teresa Stangel. I grew up on our family ranch, which is Stangel Bison Ranch here in Northeast Oregon, just outside of Enterprise, which I would like to acknowledge is traditionally Nimiipuu and Nez Perce homeland. So it's pretty cool to be able to be doing bison. Um, and I think in 2019 was my dad's 40th year with Bison. And so he's been doing it a long time. And both my sister Marta and I have came back and worked for the ranch. And then a lot of our other family helps with the ranch whenever they need help or we need help, different types of things. So it's pretty awesome to get to be another generation in that. And if people have questions, like in regards to while I'm cooking, Lynn is going to be moderating that. So she will ask me questions, or since this is her recipe, is definitely equipped to answer those as well. So I'm going to be cooking the baby meatballs and tomato basil sauce, which is out of Lynn's Pure Beef cookbook. And that's one of the things I'd like to touch base on when it comes to cooking bison. It is pretty, like, you can pretty much substitute beef or the bison for beef in any type of recipe, similar cuts. And then the only thing that you kind of have to pay attention to is making sure you don't overcook it, and cooking times might be a little bit quicker. So going to be doing that. The first part of the recipe is you're going to start off with your sauce. And the first step, you're going to get, your oil heating, and then you're wanting to start building the flavor. And so you have your garlic and your red pepper flakes. And I have everything already, portioned out. So if you are cooking it at home, it might take a little bit longer if you don't have everything already prepped like I do in all of these bowls. So you want that to start heating until it gets, a little bit sizzling and a little bit fragrant. And then after that starts going, you'll add your tomatoes in. I did make my own crushed tomatoes. It's pretty easy if you get it peeled, put the tomatoes in boiling water and then put it in an ice bath, and that'll help you peel it. And then you kind of just put it on the stove and let it simmer. In Lynn's recipe, it does say canned, so it's honestly up to personal preference and also time. I had a little bit of time this morning to be able to do that, whereas if I wouldn't have, it's just as easy and just as good to use the canned tomatoes. So while that's heating, typically if I didn't have everything prepped while this is heating, I'd be prepping some of the other stuff that's coming along with the next portion of it. So while I'm letting that heat a little ways, I'll start mixing the stuff that is for the meatballs. And so the first part, you're going to be mixing your stuff together in the bowl. And all right. It's a little bit awkward how I have my camera set up, so I want to make sure you guys can all see. So you're essentially going to be adding your stuff before the meat and getting that mixed up. So in this little thing, I've got my garlic and salt and pepper. And then you're going to be adding your ricotta, your egg, your breadcrumbs, your Parmesan cheese. I went with the shredded Parmesan cheese. I kind of like having little pieces, so it has, when you bite into it, you get a little bit of the pieces of cheese. But in the recipe, let's see, you have the finely grated Parmesan cheese. So either one of those is going to work great. And then you have your parsley. And I like to get this all, you know, kind of mixed up before you add the meat in. And since you've taken that time, I can start smelling my garlic. And so I can also feel that the pan has started to heat up a bit. And so I'm gonna come back to the sauce. And you're going to add, let's see, we do the garlic pepper. Yes, and so then you're just gonna add the rest of the stuff for the sauce. So the tomatoes, the red wine, and your basil. I really like basil, so I have more than the recipe calls for. But you know, again, that's kind of personal preference, and so I really like it. And usually you end up, like, at least at our local grocery store, there is 2 sizes of basil, where there's like this much basil and then a whole big giant container. And so I usually use a little bit more than the recipe calls for, since I usually end up with more than I need. And then you're just gonna let that be simmering, probably on like medium-ish heat, and kind of just pay attention to it so that, you know, you don't scald your tomatoes. And then, yeah, just kind of do its thing and cook down while you are finishing up the meatballs. I'm gonna clear these out real quick. So then once you get that going and simmering, you're going to come back to your breadcrumb and meatballs. And if you break up the meat a little bit before you start adding it in there, it, you know, makes it just a little bit easy to start combining. And then, depending on your personal preference, you can mix it either with like a spatula, a spoon. I usually will start mixing it this way to get it broken up a little bit with the spoon, and then I start using my hands, just because it's a little bit easier to get in there and get it a little bit more uniform throughout there. So I'm gonna wash my hands really quick. And then as you're doing this, you'll start smelling that sauce cooking. I can already smell it, and it smells really great. So then start mixing up the meatballs, or the meatball mixture. And you want to make sure, let's see, can you see very well, that, like I said, it gets nice and uniform. The eggs and the breadcrumb are going to help really hold the meatball together. So you want to make sure that it gets really nice and mixed in there. Bison is quite a bit leaner than most ground meats that you're going to use. And so it really, like if you're doing this type of recipe, you want to make sure that there's something like a binding agent that's in there. you know, with the burgers and things like that, you can usually get it packed well enough that you don't necessarily need the binding agent. But with the smaller meatballs that you know, can't necessarily get really packed tight, the breadcrumbs and the egg are gonna really help hold those meatballs together so you have nice little meatballs.
What else do you like to use ground bison with to make, Teresa?
So the ground bison you can use for, you know, anything you use ground beef for, or even, you know, some of like the pork sausage. So we, you know, tacos, burgers, soups. One of the recipes that I like doing also is, you know, like stuffed zucchini boats or stuffed peppers. So pretty much anything you can do with the ground beef, you can do with ground bison. My sister Marta, one of her favorite things to do is when she makes homemade pizza, is cook it and put it on top of homemade pizza. So yeah, and it's really versatile, but like I said, since it doesn't have a lot of fat in it, you really have to pay attention to making sure that you don't overcook it, because it doesn't have that backup fat, and so it can dry out pretty easily. And so,
Do you happen to know what the fat is of your ground beef generally?
it
Roughly?
really, yeah, it really depends on the actual animal, because both of the plants that we work at are smaller scale plants, and it's, you know, the actual animal that you are using is getting ground into that ground meat. So it all kind of depends on the actual animal, the fat content of that animal. But, you know, bison are typically easily, you know, 95% plus lean. So there really isn't a ton of fat that's going to be going back into the ground. And all of our stuff is strictly just that animal as well. We don't add back bison tallow or anything like that. All right, so once you get your meat mixed up, you'll see, hopefully you can kind of see that it's nice in uniform. And then this is when you're gonna start making your little meatballs. In the back, I can hear and see my sauce kind of simmering. And like I said, kind of keep an eye on that. If you need to turn it down, you can turn it down so that it doesn't scald your stuff. And then I've got like a little plate here. I'll move back a little bit so you can see. This is just where I'm going to be making the meatballs and setting them on there until I'm ready to add them all in the sauce. I'm going to add them all at the same time just so that they cook a little bit more uniform. And the meatball size, you know, kind of just personal preference. Lynn's has like really small ones. I kind of like these, you know, medium-ish size ones that doesn't take a whole lot of work to get through if you want, or and the smaller, it gives it a little bit more versatility. You know, you can have it in one of the things that Lynn mentioned in her cookbook is, you know, the sub sandwiches. When we made it, we kind of just cooked it essentially like spaghetti sauce and then had it over some squash zoodles. They're also just really great by themselves, and it's really a really good recipe. So yeah, just gonna be rolling these up as you go along. And I think we're doing pretty well on time, aren't we, Lynn?
Doing fantastic. Yeah.
So,
and really, yeah, the size just correlates to how much cooking time. You just, the bigger the meatball, a little bit more simmering time in the sauce, but yeah, it's totally up to you.
And depending on your cook time too, like this recipe one of the things that's like really great about it is you don't have to brown the meatballs prior to, but that is always an option too. If you have a lot of time and you want to get that brown or that caramelization, like putting them in a pan and kind of moving them around and searing them a little bit would, you know, add a little bit more, and then letting them simmer in the sauce. So the meatball, this recipe is pretty versatile, and it's pretty easy not to mess up, so that you can be, you know, kind of do a lot of different things with it and still end up with some great meatballs and some great sauce. Or if your meatballs don't work out, just smash them all up and you have meat sauce, and you can just do it that way. So pretty easy to be flexible with it. Are there any questions or anything in regards to the recipe right now? Do we see any of the chat box?
Not seeing any questions flying into the chat.
Well, while I'm doing the meatballs, it is a pretty easy task. So if anybody has like questions in regards to like other cuts or cooking bison in general, or even just kind of stuff with the ranch, I would be happy to answer questions. Right now, we, like a lot of the country, we ended up with like another winter. We didn't have a lot of snow for a while, and so we have some snow outside right now. It's a little bit windy, but the bison do really well in the cold weather with their nice thick coats, and they're pretty funny. You'll get the calves running around and playing in the snow, and so it's pretty cute to watch. So although the cold weather can be kind of, can get over it really quick, it is pretty fun, and it makes the mountains and everywhere around here pretty, very, very beautiful.
Well, I think a lot of people with the Texas freeze are thinking about caretaking animals. Have you had to go out and you know, chip ice to make sure that to water or anything else to take care of them in the cold?
Yeah, so one of the things, I mean, we're used to this type of weather, and so it's going to, I mean, we're going to have snow every year, and we're going to have ice and that type of stuff. So a majority of our facilities are either set up to be able to deal with that. So like our like in our corral system, our water all has like essentially heated or insulated water troughs, so we don't have to worry about it there. In some of our pastures, we do have to, you know, chop ice, but it's something that we're used to and our animals are used to. And so that's one of the things that I've just felt like so horrible for people that are not used to that, and those animals that aren't used to that. It's a really big difference in like something they didn't sign up for living in that area of the country. And so, yeah, we do have to deal with some of the colder weather, but you know, we know that it's eventually coming, and so we're a little bit more equipped for it. The other thing with the bison that I always say a little thank you to my dad for choosing bison around this time of year is the bison don't calve until, you know, like late April, early May, like June, and they don't let us help with calving either. So while a lot of my friends are dealing with calving right now in this cold, nasty weather, I am very appreciative of the bison that calve a little bit later in better weather, and the fact that we typically don't have to deal with it.
We do have a question about feed in terms of what, you know, with the snow on the ground covering the grasses, because typically they are consuming the grasses. What are they eating right now? Is it the same as cattle? And
so we in the wintertime, and just kind of depending, we supplement. And so since we're 100% grass fed, you know, we're feeding hay. And it kind of just depends on the specific animal and the time of year and what my dad and my sister are wanting to focus on with those animals so like the mixture of either like alfalfa or grass hay. And so at this time of year, you will see the bison grazing a bit on grass just out on the ones that we have on pasture. But we do go out and we feed them big bales of hay every day. And then in our corral system, we do have animals in there right now. We have essentially these hay feeders that we've made at our shop, and we just put our big bales in there so that they have access to as much hay as they would like during this time. And then, you know, every day we go in there, check their bunks or the feed bunks, and then add stuff as needed. Yeah, that was a good question. Okay. And you'll see I've got all of my meatballs made. I'm gonna go wash my hands real quick. Okay. All right. And then you're gonna kind of check your sauce, stir it around. And then you're gonna drop all of your meatballs into your sauce so that they can sit and simmer in there. I'm using my little tongs because later on I like to, you know, turn them around just so that the heat gets a little bit more distributed. And so I'm gonna just put all of these in here.
Even though you made those bigger, Teresa, that's still quite a few meatballs.
Yeah, no,
that would feed.
Yeah, it's like you know, the recipe is a whole pound of meat. And yeah, the one thing that I really do like about this recipe too is the sauce in itself is really nice and hearty too, especially depending on the type of tomatoes that you end up going with. Like since mine I made myself, and the tomato pieces are a little bit thicker, so it feels like almost a meal in itself, getting nice big pieces of tomatoes. So yeah, and it does make a lot of meatballs.
Yeah, I was just watching you do this. Is really fun for me to see, because I was thinking you could double the amount of sauce for that same amount of meat.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
You know, that whole thing would freeze well too for future dinner, since we're not hosting like big potlucks.
I know. Well, the trick is it making it long enough to freeze, because that was my intention last time, but I definitely went with leftovers pretty quick because I was really excited about it. So yeah. All right. And then I'm gonna bring the thing over real quick so you guys can kind of see it in the pot. Let's see. This might be the best way to go. So you'll see that I have, you know, my tomatoes, my tomato sauce, and then all the meatballs are in there. And so it's going to just sit on there and simmer for a while. And I'm going to cover it. And since, you know, the sauce isn't completely covering the meatballs that I have in there, I'm going to keep an eye on that and then just go back later and probably rotate them so that they are going to get an even amount of cooking as opposed to one side getting really well cooked down in the sauce and then the top part of it not being quite as well cooked. All right, so I'm gonna clean up just a little bit. And then if people have questions or comments or anything,
Well, Julia said you're making it look really easy, which is true. I can't believe how tidy your counter is. Please come cook at my house. And
I definitely, like I said, cleaned up before I was doing this, one, and two, when you are doing the prep beforehand, it does make things a lot quicker and a lot easier, although there are more dishes to do. So typically when I'm just cooking at home, it might be a little bit more scattered than this, but yeah, tried to be as organized as possible for the event. But yeah.
So we're coming up, we just hit our half-hour mark, Teresa.
Okay. Yeah.
And Julia also asked my comment about doubling the sauce but not the meat. What do you think about doubling the sauce but not the meat, or doubling both? Any
yeah, no, it honestly is probably just going to be like a personal preference on what you want. Doubling the sauce is going to give you a lot of extra sauce, and then I would probably be more inclined to using that with like pasta dishes or something like that, where you're going to want a lot of sauce in there. And then even, you know, like I said, if you're wanting to do a couple different things, like if you did double the sauce and not the meat, you could take, you know, some of that sauce, set it aside, and even break up some of the meatballs and have a meat sauce that you can freeze for later too. You know, it's really just kind of the personal preference and what you're looking for. And then if you have kind of future ideas too, because like I said, this sauce is fantastic without the meat as well. So if you're just wanting, you know, some sauce for pasta, or if you have the tomatoes broken down really well too, it'd be really easy to have it for, you know, the red sauce if you're making homemade pizza, you know, stuff to dip toast or marinara, pretty much, you know, anything you can think of to use the tomato sauce, you could definitely, or typical marinara sauce, you would definitely be able to use this for.
Yeah, because the bison, as it's cooking, the bison is flavoring that tomato sauce. Yeah. Even if you don't have a meatball, you're still getting that wonderful flavor.
Yeah, it's going to be really, like I just thinking about, like, it would make a really nice pizza, like sauce, and have really depth of flavor in it. But yeah.
Julie had one more question. She said, we have really hot burners. So do you have any suggestions how to, you know, keep it in the heat low and even to cook those meatballs evenly?
So pan, like making sure you have a really nice pan is probably going to be helpful too. I don't know, a double boiler might be an option too, depending. So like if you're able to kind of set up where and I don't know, Lynn, you might know some too, like if there's larger double boilers, like, or setting up some sort of like where you have your pan that has water underneath it and then another pan, you know, like on top of it. So it's having a little bit more of an even heat, and it's kind of taking that initial like really, really hot heat and turning it into the steam. So that might be an option, but making sure that if you are doing something like that, you're doing it appropriately, so you're not going to have a wreck with hot water everywhere. So that may be an option. If there's not really big, you know, kind of double boilers, you might have to cut the recipe down a little bit to accommodate for that. The other option too is if you have really hot burners, if you do have access to like either a plug-in skillet, or this would probably be a really great recipe to easily put into a crock pot as well. You might just have to adjust your time a little bit, because one of the things with the sauce is cooking it a little bit beforehand helps develop those flavors. And so you may just cook your sauce on the stove and make sure that you're paying attention to it and kind of stirring it around. And then once the sauce gets cooked well, and kind of some flavors developed, and then you have your meatballs ready, you could just put all of the sauce and the meatballs in a like slow cooker or a crock pot. And then that could give you an option that has a little bit more like even heat as opposed to that really hot heat on burners. Because yeah, that can definitely play a factor into it if you don't want to burn your stuff. So it would be, yeah, I think either adjusting to a crock pot would be probably a really good option too, just and also depending on your time frame. Do you have
I wasn't really using a crock pot much when I wrote the book, but it seems like an ideal crock pot recipe. And then just in terms of, Julia, general issues with an overly hot burner, either buying a heat diffuser so you elevate it above the heat source a little bit, or you can even take a piece of tin foil and kind of twist it into a snake that you turn into a circle, and you can kind of improvise a heat diffuser. It's not elegant or ideal, but if you, again, it's just that little bit of you're afraid of scorching, that'd be a couple of other options. Yeah. So that's what we have for questions so far, and we're coming up on just about 40 minutes out. So
perfect. Yeah. And then, you know, you're just going to essentially let that simmer on the stove until one, like I said, I'm going to go back through and I'm probably going to flip my meatballs over. You'll see it start changing color and browning a little bit. And then, yeah, just kind of keep an eye on it. And then I always do a test run where I take one and open it up and make sure and see whether it's been cooked all the way through. And then one of the benefits of this recipe, like I had mentioned with the bison, where if you overcook it, it can dry out. This is a moist recipe, so even if you do cook your meatballs a little bit longer than you were intending, there's a ton of moisture in that sauce, and so that really shouldn't be like, you're not, I mean, unless you left it on the stove all day and let it scorch and like go a little bit crazy that way, you aren't going to have too big of an issue with anything drying out or being overcooked. I guess I'm not. No.
How are they looking?
They're looking good. I'll show you guys. And with it steamy, like when you have it covered too, the tops are gonna get brown, like cooked also. So can you guys see? So yeah, it's already starting to cook some from the hot, like the heat on top. And so I'll probably rotate them, but yeah, you can see that I mean, with the heat from the sauce and then having it covered, you know, the meatballs are cooking pretty quickly. And, you know, Lynn's recipe says 18 to 20 minutes. So it really is a nice, quick, a relatively quick recipe. So yeah, I'm gonna grab my tongs and start flipping those.
Is there anything else people should know about Stangel Bison or the ranch itself?
You know, off the top of my head, I would just say, well, I like, in general, I think that, you know, supporting, I'll finish those later so I can talk to the camera. But especially with like COVID and seeing how that type of stuff has been affected, I think, you know, trying to support your local ranches and, you know, hopefully getting your food closer to home is always, you know, a little bit more secure option like we saw with all of the COVID stuff. So we always really appreciate having local supporters and new people that come to us. So it really is, especially, you know, making sure that you do support those local farmers and ranchers and small operations, because they're really depending on, you know, the local customers to help get them through and do what they're passionate about so that they can provide their customers and other people with nice, healthy, flavorful options. So I guess that would be a little bit of my spiel, which is one of the reasons why I'm glad that we have gotten involved and started doing some of the stuff with the slow food movement, or slow foods and slow food Wallowa, and doing this producer grant, because it's really giving some of those small producers an option or a lot of help to get started with certain things. Or who are some of the previous winners of the grant, Lynn?
So last year it was Caroline Leone. She's growing commercial mushrooms, and I just heard a little update from her that we might see her mushrooms at the farmers market this season. Nella May's farm, she's in Union County, and she is a produce grower. We helped fund a new tiller to increase her efficiency. And then Nathan Slinker at Alderslope Gardens, he invested in a low tunnel system to increase or to expand his growing season.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I guess my little soapbox would be to make sure that you guys are supporting local as much as possible, and organizations like Slow Foods or other types of things that are really supporting the producers and the farmers and ranchers in your area. And some of those smaller places, so that hopefully we can shift from all of that commercialized stuff to back to more regional foods and local foods and things like that.
That's what we're all about, and we're happy to have Genuine Wallowa County Provisions both supporting this Cook Live event and being on the call, because they've been able to aggregate a whole bunch of local growers and food producers and artisans to be able to make it more accessible, because it's producing it as one thing and then making it more available and widely accessible. And free local delivery has been a huge boon to our market, and I think it's working incredibly well for everyone. So if you have anything you want to wrap up with, we can close it down. Should we have a meatball beauty shot before we go?
Yeah, here, I'll bring it back over. My camera is set up on my stock pot and another pot and some cookbooks, so it's a little bit easier to move this over there. So yeah, and you'll see that they are starting to brown nicely. I'm not sure how good the picture is, but using that shredded Parmesan, you'll see the little chunks and pieces of the cheese start melting, so that, yeah, you'll have a nice yummy meatball to bite into, whichever way you end up going, either with some pasta by itself, or it is hold on just a second. Had a dry spot catching my throat, so yeah. All right,
well, we will sign off and let you enjoy your meatballs. Maybe you'll share them with your dad, Joe, your sister.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring them up to my parents. So yeah.
Awesome.
And if anybody, you know, we are always open to, if people have questions about like cooking with Bison, we have tips and tricks on our website, or we are always open to people sending us an email if they have a cut that they like want either tips or ideas on. But like I said, any beef recipe you can essentially adjust for Bison to work with it. Even a lot of pork recipes, it's just making sure that you monitor that cooking time and not overcooking it. And if you do need to add a little bit of moisture or a little bit of fat, that helps a lot too. So Yeah.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Feel free to send any other questions you have to slowfoodwc@gmail.com and stay in touch via the links we shared.